There are so many commodities that come through the ports.
An accident can happen.
Nobody can take on hazmat by themselves. You need to get away from it immediately and report it to somebody so that we can get the proper authorities out there.
Anything can happen. It could be an accident, just around the corner waiting. You got to keep your guard up at all times.
Every day, a special group of materials moves by ship, truck, and rail through our ports. These materials fuel our vehicles. They fertilize our crops, improve manufacturing and medicine, and perform thousands of other jobs. But when they're shipped in large quantities, they can be a hazard to human life and to property, posing risks of fire, explosion, contamination, and more. These hazardous materials, or hazmat, are packaged to move safely to their destinations. But when you're working with them or just working around them, every choice counts. Hazardous materials are shipped under strict federal and international guidelines to ensure that they're packaged safely, identified easily, and handled properly. In this program, you'll learn to scan and focus to identify hazardous materials through placards, labels, and other documentation. You'll learn how to create a safety net by helping your coworkers work around hazmat safely. And you'll own the safety by learning what your responsibilities are when transporting and handling hazmat. Hazardous materials are materials that can pose a risk to health or safety when they're transported by commercial means. These materials are designated as hazardous by the United States Department of Transportation, or DOT, and fall into distinct categories. Even though they may be packed safely, if hazardous materials are released, or if they combine with other materials, they can do a great amount of harm in a short time. The kinds of hazards associated with these materials include fire, explosion, poisoning, radiation exposure, infection, or burns. Releases of hazardous materials can be controlled by professionals with the proper equipment. Under no circumstances should you try to control these materials on your own. Whenever hazmat or hazardous materials are transported, they must be accompanied by documentation. Let's look at what must go along with every hazmat shipment. Placards are large signs that are attached to the vehicle or cargo container carrying the hazardous material. They provide basic information about the type of hazard the material poses. This information is communicated in 4 ways: the placard color, the symbol, the United Nations Identification Number, or UNID, and the hazard class, also indicated by a number. The color and the symbol work together to identify the type of hazard. Red, for example, shows that a material is a flammable liquid or gas, while white identifies a toxic or infectious material. The UNID indicates the specific material within the container. For example, the UNID 1203 identifies gasoline. The hazard class describes the category into which each hazard falls. Let's look at these individually. There are 9 classes of hazards. Explosives are hazard class 1. These are materials that can be set off by shock, heat, electricity, even radio signals. The division number indicates the type of explosive hazard, such as 1.1. That would be explosives with a mass explosion hazard. Or 1.3, explosives with a fire hazard. Gases are hazard class 2 and can present several different hazards. They may be flammable, such as acetylene. Non-flammable compressed gases, such as nitrogen, still pose a hazard because a cylinder can burst with destructive force. Or poison gases, such as chlorine. Flammable liquids are in hazard class 3. Vapors from these liquids ignite easily under normal conditions. Class 4 hazards are flammable solids, such as sodium metal or phosphorus. These materials are readily combustible when exposed to air or water. Oxidizers are Class 5 hazards. These materials are not flammable on their own, but they can either release or supply enough oxygen to a fire to make them extremely dangerous by burning hotter, faster. Class 6 hazards, or poisons, are materials other than gases that are known to be toxic to humans. These materials may be liquids, or they may fill the air as dust or powder and can be inhaled. Class 6 hazards also include infectious materials, such as medical waste. Class 7 materials are radiation hazards, or materials that give off ionizing radiation. These materials can cause damage at the cellular level and cause organ failure or cancer, even with short exposure times. Corrosive liquids are Class 8 hazards. These materials, such as strong acids, can destroy human skin in a short time and also damage metals such as steel and aluminum. Miscellaneous hazards in Class 9 are materials that present a hazard during transportation, but which don't meet the definition of any other hazard class. Spray cans and car airbags, which use nitrogen as the inflation gas, are a common Class 9 hazard. Labels are attached to material packaging, such as a bottle, cylinder, or box. Labels are similar to placards in the information they convey. Labels are identical in appearance to placards, but they don't have the UNID number on them since there's more detailed identification available nearby. Other methods of identification include markings that show the name of the material, its chemical makeup, emergency contact information for the manufacturer, and any hazards presented by the material. The Dangerous Cargo Manifest is a document that identifies all the hazardous materials being transported on a vessel. It contains the shipping name and the identification number of each hazardous material on board, as well as an emergency response telephone number. In addition, the Dangerous Cargo Manifest lists the amount of each material, the type of packaging it's in, its classification according to DOT regulations, and its location on the vessel. The Dangerous Cargo Manifest is important if there's an emergency on the vessel, such as a fire, so that potential hazards can be identified and handled quickly by emergency personnel. One reason it's important to know when you're handling or working with hazardous materials is so you can react quickly if you see a spill or a release from a container. As you scan your work area, focus on the hazmat placards you see and make sure you're aware of all the hazmat around you. Get in the habit of looking for signs of a spill or release from any container. If you see a fresh stain or puddle near a container with a hazmat placard on it, you should suspect a release. If you do see these signs, you must assume that there's more than just a liquid present, but also a dangerous effect along with it, such as vapors that could ignite poisonous or corrosive fumes. If packaging within the container breaks, you may notice a discoloration of the container from heat or corrosion. If a gas is present, you may see a cloud near the container, or you may notice an odor. In the case of some gases, there may be no odor, but you'll notice other effects, such as burning in your nose and mouth, dizziness, nausea, or drowsiness. No matter what signs you see or symptoms you feel, if you suspect that there's been a hazmat release, do not try to contain it yourself. Leave the area immediately and notify your supervisor. Don't call for help on your own cell phone. Create a safety net by alerting your supervisor or security office so everyone will know there's a problem. Once you've reported the hazmat release, wait for and follow instructions. Your employer has an emergency action plan in place for spills, releases, and other emergency events. Own the safety by making sure you know the plan and your part in it. Know how to find the evacuation areas. Remember, your only responsibility is to get away from the hazard and report the problem. Knowledge is your greatest defense against all hazardous materials. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has created a Hazard Communication, or HAZCOM, standard, which requires your workplace to keep you informed about the hazardous materials you work with or handle. The regulation also requires your workplace to provide you with information on preventing exposure to these materials. It requires you to notify your employer of any leaks or spills that you see. If you work around hazardous materials as part of your job, for example in the maintenance shop, you may want to know some important facts about them. The Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS, is supplied by the manufacturer and available through your workplace. The MSDS contains vital information about the material, including its generic name, physical characteristics, and normal state. The MSDS also describes the type of hazard the material poses and the conditions that make it hazardous, such as heat or exposure to other materials. The MSDS contains information on the material's effects on the human body and lists emergency or first aid measures to take if a person's been exposed to the material. It also describes the actions to take in case of a leak or a spill. If you work with any hazardous materials, don't wait until there's an emergency to read the MSDS. Read it before you need it. If you don't know where you can obtain one, ask your safety supervisor and make sure that an MSDS is available for each hazardous material you work with. If your job requires you to work with hazardous materials, you'll get special training on proper handling, use, and disposal of those materials from your direct employer. You'll most likely be using them in consumer quantities that don't qualify as spill or release hazards. However, federal law still requires you to handle and dispose of hazardous materials using approved methods. Every choice counts when you work around hazardous materials. The choice to notice and respect the placards and labels identifying hazmat. The choice to be aware when you're handling hazmat. And the choice to handle it properly. A hazmat incident can have widespread effects, but you can own the safety by learning about the hazmat you handle and by knowing your role in its safe transport and in your workplace's emergency action plan. Your awareness is crucial to workplace safety when dealing with hazmat. Scan the area and focus on hazmat placards, improper handling, and spills or releases of hazmat from containers. Create a safety net by reminding other workers to handle hazmat with care and by responding properly to accidents. If you notice a spill or release, get out of the area and report it immediately. Hazardous materials serve important roles in making our lives better, and they make up a large part of what you handle on the docks. You have a right and a need to know what you're handling, so you can work safely and continue to keep the goods moving.